My name is Helena Marlowe. I'm 68 years old, a retired tax auditor, who once believed that numbers never lie, only people do. For most of my life, I trusted figures, documents, and the discipline of order more than words or promises. I used to think that after 40 years in public service, I'd earned a quiet retirement filled with books, mint tea, and dinners with my daughter. But on a cold Friday evening in Portland, that illusion ended with one text message. I was getting ready to go to my daughter's for dinner when my lawyer texted, "Call me back," before it's too late. I dialed his number immediately. What he said about my son-in-law shocked me to the core. It was one of those moments when time stops, not because of fear, but because the mind refuses to believe what it's hearing. I stood in front of the hallway mirror, holding my phone with trembling fingers. The scent of peppermint tea filled the kitchen behind me, the kettle still whistling softly. My reflection stared back, silver hair, neatly pinned pearls around my neck coat, buttoned halfway. I looked ready for dinner, not for war. If you're still listening, let me know where you are. Every comment you leave is another mark on this journey. And if this story has touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like so it can reach even further. Helena Victor Liang's voice came through, urgent but measured. Where are you right now? At home. Why stay there? Don't go anywhere. Don't speak to anyone until I explain. Victor had been my attorney for almost 30 years. I'd seen him argue with senators and bankers without losing his composure once. Hearing his voice shake unsettled me more than the words themselves. "What's going on, Victor?" I asked. He exhaled sharply through the receiver. A document just hit the county registry. A transfer of title and financial power of attorney. It bears your name, your signature. But you didn't sign it. The room around me seemed to tilt slightly. I reached for the kitchen counter to steady myself. A transfer of title to whom? There was a pause. When Victor finally spoke, his tone dropped to a whisper as if the phone line could betray us. "Nathan Bennett, my son-in-law." I didn't answer right away. Outside, rain tapped against the window, rhythmic and relentless. The clock above the stove ticked louder than it should have. Victor continued. "He filed it 3 days ago. The notary claim is fake. I checked the code. There's no record of the witness signature he used." I took a slow breath. And Clara. Her name appears only once, listed as an observer. My guess, she doesn't know. My hand tightened around the phone. Nathan had always been charming in that polished, deliberate way of men who think charm is currency. He ran a design firm, talked about family legacy, and toasted at dinners as if sincerity could be rehearsed. I'd ignored my instincts for years, convincing myself that my daughter's happiness mattered more than my doubts. Now the doubt had a name, a timestamp, and a legal trail. "Victor," I said quietly, "what do I do?" "For now, nothing. Don't confront them. I'll send you everything by secure email tonight. We need evidence before we act. I'm assigning a forensic investigator, Marisol Vega. She's the best in the state. Let her in when she arrives." "Understood," I said. My voice sounded foreign, detached. Before hanging up, he added one more sentence. "Helena, if he's done what I think he's done, you're not safe financially. Not yet." The call ended. The kitchen fell into silence except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, trying to make sense of the absurdity. A forged signature, a stolen house, a betrayal wrapped in paperwork. I had audited criminals who'd hidden millions through offshore accounts, but betrayal hits differently when it carries your own handwriting. I poured the tea into my cup and watched the steam curl upward. My late husband Richard used to say that truth has a temperature. It always starts cold. Tonight, it felt freezing. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker through the drizzle. Every corner of my house whispered memories: the piano, where Clara learned her first scales, the shelf of family photo albums, the clock Richard had repaired after his surgery. The idea that someone wanted to take it all quietly, legally, efficiently, made my stomach twist. I opened my laptop. The email from Victor had already arrived. The subject line read, "Evidence preview, do not share." Inside were scanned copies of the forged documents. My name appeared in perfect cursive identical to my signature from 15 years ago. Whoever had done it wasn't guessing they'd practiced. Below the signature block, one phrase stood out, beneficiary Nathan Bennett. I closed the laptop, exhaled slowly, and looked at my own hands. They were steady again. That's how auditors survive panic, by anchoring themselves in precision. I took out a notepad and began listing questions. Where did he get my signature? Who notarized this document? Did Clara participate, or was she used? How far was Nathan willing to go? Old habits returned like reflex. Investigate, first speak later. Then the phone rang again, this time a softer tone from my daughter. "Hi, Mom." Clara's voice was light, a little distracted. "Are you still coming for dinner? Nathan's grilling salmon. He made your favorite glaze." For a second, I almost answered with warmth the way I always did, but something inside me shifted. I glanced at the folder on my screen. "Yes, darling," I said finally. "I'll be there soon." Because sometimes the best way to understand the truth is to walk straight into the lie. I hung up and went to the mirror once more. My reflection looked calm, too calm. I picked up my coat purse and car keys. Before leaving, I turned off the kettle and the lights. As the door clicked shut behind me, I whispered to the empty room, "You chose the wrong woman to deceive." The rain had turned to mist by the time I stepped outside. Streetlights reflected on the wet pavement like shards of broken glass. My car waited quietly in the driveway engine, cold windshield speckled with droplets. Inside, I adjusted the rearview mirror and looked at myself one last time. The name on the file was my son-in-law's, and in that reflection I saw not fear, but resolve, the kind that comes when truth demands to be followed wherever it leads. The rain had softened into a fine mist by the time I reached Clara's neighborhood. Her house glowed from a distance, the tall windows spilling warm light onto the quiet suburban street. I parked across the driveway and took a moment before stepping out. Through the windshield, I could see silhouettes moving inside Nathan's tall frame at the dining table, Clara arranging something near the kitchen counter. For a moment, it looked like an ordinary family scene, but now I knew better. I carried a small box of pastries I'd bought on the way, my attempt to keep up the ritual of Friday dinners. It was something Richard and I had started decades ago, one night each week, dedicated to family. I wanted to believe that tradition still meant something. When I rang the bell, Nathan opened the door himself. He was all smiles, dressed in a tailored navy shirt that probably cost more than my monthly pension. "Mom, you made it," he said warmly, stepping aside. "You must be freezing out there. Come in." The word "mom" hung in the air like perfume, sweet, deliberate, and fake. Clara appeared from the kitchen, her eyes lighting up briefly before softening into a worried smile. "Hi, Mom. I'm so glad you came. Dinner's almost ready." "I wouldn't miss it," I said, handing her the box. "Dessert from that little bakery you like." Nathan chuckled. "Oh, and you still remember her favorite eclairs. You're the best mother-in-law." He led me to the dining table, which looked like something out of a magazine: crystal glasses, linen napkins, wine decanted into a glass carafe that glowed amber under the chandelier. The light from above shimmered through a ring of glass pendants, refracting across the table like shards of sunlight caught under water. It was beautiful, almost theatrical. He poured wine into my glass without asking. "A 2014 Merlot," he said proudly. "Goes perfectly with salmon. I made the glaze myself." I smiled faintly. "You've become quite the chef, haven't you?" "Only for special guests," he said, his voice smooth. "You know, Clara and I were talking earlier about your place. It must be hard maintaining such a big property all by yourself." There it was, the opening line. He didn't waste any time. Clara shot him a look barely perceptible, but sharp enough for me to catch. "Nathan," she murmured. "Let's not talk about that now." He shrugged, unbothered. "I'm just saying it might be time to make things easier for Mom. Simplify, you know, I set my glass down carefully. Simplify, yes." He smiled, that perfect half smile I'd learned to distrust. "Maybe think about selling or transferring some of the management to us. That way you can just relax and enjoy life. Let me handle the paperwork." I looked at him steadily. "Paperwork. You've always liked paperwork, haven't you?" For a split second, his smile faltered. Then it returned brighter. "It's what I do best," he said lightly. Clara changed the subject, her tone too quick. "Mom, do you want some more bread? Nathan baked it himself." I nodded politely. "Thank you, darling." As they moved around the table, serving dishes, pouring more wine, I let my eyes wander. A folder sat on the sideboard near Nathan's laptop, half tucked beneath a stack of design magazines. A corner of a legal form peeked out county letterhead, faint but unmistakable. I knew that seal. My years in auditing had taught me to spot details. Others missed the type of paper, the crisp fold, the official watermark, barely visible under warm light. The same kind used in property transfers. I took a sip of wine and leaned back, pretending to admire the chandelier. Its glass pendants trembled slightly when the furnace kicked in, scattering patterns across the table. Through the reflection, I could see Nathan's expression shift every time he mentioned money. It was subtle, his jaw tightening his thumb, rubbing against the stem of his glass, small tells of control disguised as charm. "Mom," he said suddenly, "I've been meaning to ask, have you ever considered moving closer to us? Maybe into something smaller? We could help arrange it. The market's great right now." I looked straight at him. "You seem to know the market quite well." "Of course," he said with mock modesty. "Real estate is a passion of mine. I've even handled a few family portfolios recently." "That's impressive," I replied evenly. "Did you need my signature for those too?" Clara froze the serving spoon mid-air. Nathan blinked, then laughed softly. "Oh, Mom, you're funny. Always the auditor." I smiled. Old habits die hard. Silence stretched for a few seconds. The only sound was the gentle clinking of cutlery. Then Clara spoke quietly. "Mom, are you—" "All right, you seem tense." I met her gaze, soft but steady. "I'm fine, dear. Just thinking." Nathan filled his own glass again. "About what the future," I said, simply. "Mine, yours, ours." He grinned, mistaking restraint for weakness. "Well, we'll make sure it's a secure one. You can trust us." "I do," I said calmly. "That's why I'm here." Dinner continued, but something had shifted. Beneath the warmth of the food and the glow of the chandelier, the air had thickened. Every word felt like a chess move, every smile a disguised calculation. At one point, Nathan reached across the table to refill my glass again. I let him. To family, he toasted. To family, I echoed. But inside, the words felt hollow. The wine was good, rich, and smooth. It coated the back of my throat like truth, hiding behind elegance. I studied Clara as she smiled nervously between us, her loyalty torn, her eyes darting from my face to his. There was love there, yes, but also fear. When the plates were cleared, Nathan offered dessert. Tiramisu. Homemade. How thoughtful. I said, though, my appetite had vanished. He leaned back, swirling the last of his wine. "Mom, if you ever want to go over any paperwork or investments, just say the word. You know I'm here for you." I met his eyes. They were a deep, confident brown, too. Confident. "I know exactly where you are, Nathan." For a brief second, something flickered behind his expression. Irritation. Maybe even suspicion. Then he laughed again, softer this time, almost indulgent. "You're incredible, Helena. Always one step ahead," he said. "I try," I replied. Clara started gathering dishes. "Mom, you should come over more often. It's been quiet without you." "I'll visit soon," I said. "I have some matters to settle first." Nathan stood, placing a hand lightly on my shoulder as he walked me to the door. "You worry too much. Everything's fine. Let me take care of things for you." I looked up at him. "That's the problem, Nathan. You always want to take care of things." Outside, the rain had stopped. The driveway gleamed under the porch light. I walked to my car slowly, my reflection rippling in the wet pavement. Behind me, through the glass door, I saw Nathan watching, smiling faintly, a silhouette framed in gold light. Inside the car, I started the engine and sat for a moment. My hands rested on the steering wheel, steady but cold. In my head, I replayed the evening, the folder on the table, the forced laughter, the way he said our future like a man talking about dividends. As I pulled away from the house, I whispered to myself almost like an accounting note. He spoke about my future like an investment, but I knew I was the asset he wanted to own. By the time I got home, the streetlights had turned the wet pavement into rivers of amber. The air smelled faintly of rain and iron, the kind that seeps into your clothes and your bones. I took off my coat, hung it neatly on the rack, and stood in the silence of my house, the same silence that had once felt comforting, but tonight it was watchful. My phone buzzed. A text from Victor. She's on her way. Her name is Marisol Vega. No title, no small talk. Just that. I put on a pot of coffee and sat at the dining table, the laptop open, the folder of falsified documents still on the screen. The fake signature stared back at me, my name perfectly forged, perfectly violated. I had seen thousands of falsified tax filings in my career, but this was personal. 15 minutes later, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. Headlights cut through the window blinds like interrogation beams. I opened the door before she knocked. Mrs. Marlowe. The woman standing on my porch was younger than I expected. Mid-40s maybe, with sharp cheekbones, dark hair tied back, and eyes that missed nothing. She carried a laptop bag and a single manila folder. Her coat was still wet at the edges. "I'm Marisol Vega," she said, her voice clipped efficient. Mr. Liang briefed me. "May I come in?" I nodded. "Please." She stepped inside and surveyed the room like a detective entering a crime scene. Not out of suspicion, out of precision. She didn't comment on the decor or the framed family photos or the half-empty coffee pot. She simply placed her bag on the table, opened her laptop, and looked at me. "Tell me everything," she said. I did. From Victor's call to the dinner. From Nathan's fake warmth to the file on the sideboard. She listened without interruption, typing occasionally her fingers, moving fast but deliberate. When I finished, she asked one question. "Can I see the forged documents?" I turned the laptop toward her. She scanned the PDFs, zooming in on the signatures, the notary stamps, the metadata. Whoever did this, she said, finally knew what they were doing. The digital fingerprint has been scrubbed, but they made one mistake, the timing. The timing, I repeated. She nodded. These documents were digitally notarized 6 weeks before the notary listed in the stamp renewed her certification. That's impossible. Which means the stamp file was reused and old ones stolen or bought online. That alone is felony fraud. Her calm tone carried the quiet gravity of a surgeon naming a tumor. I watched her pull out an external drive and connect it to my computer. "We're going to trace every transaction tied to your accounts over the last year," she explained. "Every payment transfer or memo line that mentions property trust or escrow. Nathan may have hidden his trail, but digital systems always leave fingerprints." The screen filled with lines of data, account numbers, transfer IDs, timestamps. She worked with frightening speed filtering, cross-referencing, color coding. My years in auditing helped me follow the logic, but even I was impressed. Finally, she stopped. "There," she said. A series of transfers highlighted in yellow stood out, small, irregular deposits sent to an account labeled Marlowe Transition Fund. I frowned. "That's not one of mine." "It's not supposed to be," she replied. "It's one he created under your name. I've seen this tactic before. They establish a transition or management fund to make it look legitimate, then gradually siphon the money to private accounts. Nathan's been setting this up for months." She clicked again, bringing up a date column. The first transfer was from 7 months ago, exactly 2 weeks after Richard's estate was fully closed. "He waited until your late husband's assets were finalized," Marisol said almost to herself. "That's when he started the operation." I felt my throat tighten. "How much?" "About $260,000 so far," she said calmly. "But the fund structure shows room for more. He was planning a second phase, probably the house." She turned the screen toward me, showing a draft legal request Nathan had prepared but never filed property transition authorization, Helena Marlowe residence. It had my digital signature attached. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Marisol's voice cut through the fog. "Mrs. Marlowe, you need to understand something. He's been preparing for this for at least 6 months, but no one, not even him, can prepare for a woman who stays this calm." Her words landed like a verdict, not emotional, but exact. I looked at her, steadying my breath. "So what do we do now?" "Now," she said, "we pull the thread." She opened the manila folder. Inside were printed document subpoenas in draft form, legal requests for financial statements, a list of intermediary banks. She had already been working before arriving. "Victor will file the first motion on Monday," she continued. "I'll have mirrored copies of every transfer linked to the Marlowe Transition Fund. Once we trace where the money lands offshore crypto shell company, we'll have proof of intent." "Intent," I echoed softly. "The one thing they can't deny." She nodded. "Exactly. Intent makes it criminal." The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. The coffee had gone cold. Rain started again, tapping the window softly like a metronome to the quiet focus between us. Marisol leaned back slightly. "I need to ask something personal," she said. "Do you think Clara knows?" I stared at the documents, the numbers lined up like gravestones of trust. "I don't know," I said truthfully, "but I can't afford to assume innocence anymore." She studied me for a long moment. "You remind me of someone," she said finally, "a retired accountant I once helped. Her son forged her name on a mortgage. She thought she was broken when she found out. But when it went to court, she didn't cry. She brought spreadsheets." A faint smile touched my lips. "Numbers don't lie." "Exactly." Marisol closed her laptop. "And you still know how to read them. That's what gives us the upper hand. He thinks he's the only strategist in the room." I walked her to the door. The rain had eased again, leaving a sheen on the porch steps. She turned before getting into her car. "Helena," she said, her voice low but steady. "This won't be quick. He'll sense something soon. But remember, fraud unravels faster when it's built on arrogance. Let him believe he's safe." I nodded. "That's easy. He's always believed that." She smiled a small, knowing curve. "Good. Then he'll never see you coming." When her car disappeared down the street, the house fell silent once more. But this time, the silence didn't feel hollow. It felt poised like the pause before a move on a chessboard. I sat back at the table, staring at the words, "Marlowe Transition Fund," on the screen. My name had been used to build the trap, and now it would become the weapon. I opened a fresh page in my ledger and began to write. Assets, evidence, patience. One ally who doesn't waste words. The numbers told me everything I needed to know. Nathan had spent 6 months building a structure of deceit. I would spend one night designing its collapse. My plan required patience and 2 things I had learned to keep: a steady hand and a ledger. I have spent my life reading balance sheets and behavior. Both reveal patterns. Both tell the truth if you know how to listen. I started by telling a small, believable lie out loud. Not to the courthouse, not to the press, but to the people who stood to lose everything. I told them I was tired of the house. The lawn, I said, was too much for me, the stairs too steep. Arizona sounded peaceful. I did it in a voice measured with melancholy, the kind that invited sympathy rather than suspicion. Clara answered every time with the same practiced alarm. Ethan paced. He called neighbors. He offered contractors and golf club referrals. What I said was plausible. What they heard was panic. That is the difference between a good story and a convincing performance. Behind that small theater, Victor and Marisol moved the machinery. I cannot describe how comfortless it is to let others do violent work for you. It is like watching engineers test a bridge while standing beneath it. You watch the forces, you calculate the result, and you trust the design. On a late Tuesday, Victor sent a single line that made my stomach tighten. It appeared as a simple text on my phone while I was folding a hand towel in the kitchen. Flag is set. Short, clean. It felt like the snap of a starting gun. He had never been sentimental with words. That sentence meant the legal motion we had baited was filed and in motion. It meant the piece of paper that would make Ethan reveal himself had been slid into the public record. I answered with nothing. I had rehearsed my face for what would come, the art of appearing too frail to fight and too present to be spoken for. Acting had never been my profession, but auditing teaches you to be invisible and to watch. That would be my trade now. Next, Harold Quinn came over. Harold is 70. He tends his roses like they are grievances. He polishes the brass doorknob on his porch until the reflection is a map of the neighborhood. He is the kind of man who keeps time by the sound of a lawnmower and will give you sugar because his wife used to like baking. He also knows his way around a ladder, and an electrician knows what wire to run before anyone asks. He is harmless unless your business involves trespassing on kindness. I asked him to help with something small and household. He arrived with a thermos and a box of cheap tools, and he found it easy to accept the role I offered the neighbor, who installs a motion sensor light and replaces a rotted step. He did the work as if he were doing me a favor. He made a show of complaining about the cold screws and the outdated siding. He did not notice my hands were steady. Harold had always liked Clara. He called her that sweet girl with the laugh the first time he met her at the block barbecue. So when he climbed the ladder and handed me a drill, he trusted the normalcy of our task. He did not realize the camera he screwed under the eave would be a witness shaped like a stone dove. He did not know that the tiny lens hidden in its belly was a recorder on a schedule, not a voyeur. He did not ask. I did not tell him everything. The less he knew, the cleaner his testimony would be if we needed it. The camera itself was unremarkable. A sugar cube of black plastic, a legal-grade device Victor had obtained through channels. It recorded audio and video, time-stamped and encrypted, and it was configured to upload to a secure server under Victor's control. I watched Harold screw the dove into place and then step back to admire his work like any proud neighbor. He waved, muttered about the weather, and left with a thermos less full than when he arrived. The house accepted the camera like it accepted sunlight. The dove sat on the eave white against the dark wood, a small defiant presence that added nothing to the porch and everything to the truth. I adjusted the drape in the living room so the mantel would frame the birdhouse just so. The birdhouse, you recall, already had a recording device inside. The new camera completed the set. If words were ever spoken later, we would have a chorus: the birdhouse, the dove, the ledger. That evening, I sat with the ledger open on the kitchen table. Small notations times who had been called, who had dropped by, which friends had been nudged by friendly gossip. We had seeded Arthur Gable and his tendency to repeat stories. We had told one person at the coffee shop that I was considering moving, mimicking the exhausted voice I had practiced in the mirror. The rumor traveled with the speed of people who like stories more than facts. Ethan heard it. He called. He said the words I wanted him to say. We cannot let her sell. We need to protect her. He used the language Victor wanted. He raised the specter of a conservatorship and made the word sound like love. 2 days later, the papers were filed. Ethan's hand is steady in public. He can write a persuasive email that sounds like reason and reads like care. He went to the attorney with prepared statements from friends who claimed worry. He crafted the narrative of an aging mother who had suddenly become impulsive. It was a script the courthouse had seen before the worried child, the loving petition, an urgent need to protect. When the filing arrived in our inbox, Victor typed with the kind of economy that makes men in suits comfortable. Flag in play, he wrote. A symbol more than a sentence. He had engineered the outward pressure. Ethan had supplied the inciting document we needed, his own desire to assume control. People act differently when they believe the law is on their side. Ethan was no exception. When you file to take someone's agency, you must perform the righteousness of the act. Ethan did it beautifully. He called neighbors. He spoke in subdued tones to the doctor he had cultivated. He set the stage for himself as the protector. The conservatorship paperwork hung in the air like a curtain between his life and mine. We did not panic. We amplified our calm. There is a discipline to not being hurried when the world attempts to hurry you. Victor and Marisol collected copied cross-checked. Harold's small presence gave us a neighbor's truth to add to the ledger. The cameras recorded the private strings of conversation Ethan thought would remain private. The birdhouse listened to Ethan promise to manage everything and to make difficult decisions. The dove watched him pacing on the porch as he rehearsed versions of his testimony with a friend. Then came the reversal. Ethan believed he had cornered me. He believed he had the moral high ground, the sympathy of a judge, and the signatures that would shield him from scrutiny. He did not realize that the net was closing around him precisely because he had been the one to ask the court for permission to take the house off the market. When the conservatorship notice appeared in the court docket, it was public. It put his claims into the light of process, and with that light came subpoenas and scrutiny. Victor sent one more text that night, a line both clinical and triumphant. "The flag has moved." It was enough. We had turned a family argument into an arena. We had invited the law to inspect a set of claims that were by design untrue. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat near the windows that looked toward the street. The porch lights glowed like small moons. In my mind, I ran through the script I had agreed to play: the confused elderly woman, the gentle loss of memory, the tired sigh at dinner. I had to make them comfortable in their arrogance. I had to make Ethan believe he had already won. Arrogance makes people careless. Carelessness makes evidence. Harold called me the next morning. "You all right, Helena?" He asked, reluctance in his voice, as if he suspected he had been part of something larger. I told him I was fine and thanked him for the birdhouse. He chuckled and said, "Neighbors look out for one another." He did not know how right he was. He had looked out for me, and he would be called to speak of ordinary things: a ladder, a thermos, a dove, on the eve. Ordinary details are often the most persuasive. We had built the trap on the architecture of a lie. We had baited the trap with a tempting rumor. Ethan walked in expecting to sweep the board. He had made a public move, and public moves can be punished publicly. That is the reversal the petition meant to take my autonomy away had become the instrument that exposed his. When I closed the ledger that night, I wrote 3 simple lines. 1. Keep the performance believable. 2. Do not alarm those who fear for you. 3. Make sure the record tells the truth when they least expect it. The dove on the eve was sleeping under the porch light, and somewhere inside the house, the birdhouse held its small, steady witness. I folded my hands and let the silence sit with me. The trap had been set in daylight. The reversal would come in court, under oath and under law. This was no longer a private fight. The law had been invited to the table. The next move belonged to the public record. When I arrived at the courthouse that Monday morning, the air smelled like wet paper and cold marble, a mix of bureaucracy and judgment. Reporters stood near the steps holding microphones as if truth could be coaxed out by persistence. It was strange to think my name was now printed on documents stacked under their arms. Helena Marlowe v. Petition for Conservatorship. Inside, the fluorescent lights flattened every face. Clara and Ethan sat across the aisle. She was twisting her wedding ring. He was whispering in her ear, his hand placed reassuringly over hers, the gesture of a man controlling both conversation and outcome. When Ethan noticed me enter, his smile was practiced, gentle, public rehearsed. "Mom," he said softly, "you didn't have to come. This is just procedure." Procedure. I repeated, my voice steady. That's what they called it in Salem, too, before they lit the fire. He blinked, the first flicker of discomfort I'd seen since this started. The clerk called the case number. The judge adjusted his glasses. Papers rustled. The sound of bureaucracy doing what it does best, converting betrayal into format. Ethan's lawyer began with the performance of a lifetime. He painted a portrait of a loving, concerned son-in-law who had stepped in to safeguard an elderly woman's assets from confusion and possible external influence. His voice was silk wrapped around theft. Beside him, Clara looked small, fragile. Her eyes darted between us, searching for a version of the truth that hurt less. The lawyer displayed the exhibits on a projector color-coded charts showing my erratic spending, suspicious withdrawals, and uncharacteristic transfers, all fabricated of course numbers rearranged from the Marlowe Transition Fund Nathan himself had created. The irony was surgical. He was using his own fraud to justify taking my rights. Mrs. Marlowe, the judge said, turning to me, "Your counsel will have a chance to respond. But before that, do you understand the nature of this petition?" I looked up. "Yes, Your Honor. My son-in-law is attempting to convince the court that I'm incapable of managing what I've built, so he can manage it for me." A murmur ran through the room. The judge frowned. Ethan's lawyer objected, citing emotional language. The judge sustained, but the air had shifted. I glanced at Clara. Her lips trembled. She mouthed silently, "Mom, please." But I stayed silent. Sometimes restraint is the sharpest form of power. Victor stood when it was our turn. His movements were deliberate, his tone cool as winter steel. "Your Honor, the petitioner claims Mrs. Marlowe has shown confusion and poor financial judgment. Yet here are audited statements prepared and signed by the petitioner himself, showing transfers that lead directly to an account not registered in Mrs. Marlowe's name." He clicked the screen. A spreadsheet appeared. Every line item had a date, a transfer ID, and a digital signature. The name Marlowe Transition Fund filled the screen like a ghost finally visible under proper light. The courtroom murmured again. Ethan's composure wavered. Victor continued, "Furthermore, we've submitted an expert declaration confirming the digital notary seal used in these filings was expired at the time of use, meaning this document he held up the supposed authorization form is not only invalid but falsified," Ethan whispered to his lawyer. The lawyer looked paler than before. Then came the real blow, the video. Victor pressed play. The courtroom monitors flickered to life. The footage, grainy but clear, showed Ethan pacing on my porch one evening, phone in hand. His voice came through the speaker, crisp under the porch light. "Once she signs, it's all ours. I'll just file for guardianship, make it look like I'm protecting her. It's foolproof." The room froze. Even the reporters fell silent. Clara gasped, covering her mouth. "Ethan, what is that?" she whispered. He stammered. That's taken out of context." Victor turned to the judge. "Context doesn't change timestamps." "Your Honor." The judge leaned back, exhaling slowly. "We'll recess for 15 minutes. When he struck the gavel, the sound was final, like the click of a safe sealing shut. Clara followed me into the hallway. Her eyes were red. "Mom, I didn't know. He told me it was to protect you." I looked at her. Really looked. "I taught you about integrity when you were 10, remember? You asked why I never took shortcuts on clients' taxes. I said it's because one dishonest number can unravel an entire life. You learned math, Clara, but you never learned that." She started to cry. "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't." Ethan stormed out behind her, his mask slipping. "You think this ends here? You think anyone's going to believe you over me?" I smiled faintly. "You've been talking too long, Ethan. It's time the paperwork spoke instead." Victor approached, phone in hand. "The recordings authenticated and time-stamped," he said quietly, and Helena, the judge, requested a formal inquiry. "He's referring the matter to the district prosecutor." Ethan froze. "You set me up," he hissed. I looked at him calm as glass. "No, Ethan. You walked into the mirror." The reporters had gathered by then. Flashbulbs went off. Questions flew like arrows. "Mrs. Marlowe, did your son-in-law try to defraud you? How much money is involved? Are you pressing charges?" I said nothing. I simply walked past them, every step measured. Silence, when earned, carries more weight than headlines. As I reached the courthouse steps, Clara ran after me. "Mom, please, what happens now?" I turned to her. Now, the law does what family couldn't." The wind picked up, scattering dry leaves across the courthouse plaza. Behind me, cameras flashed again, but I didn't look back. Inside my head, my voice was steady, a ledger balanced at last. I taught my daughter about ethics. She taught me that blood doesn't protect you from ambition. And that perhaps was the most painful truth of all. When people talk about miracles, they imagine fire from the sky or the parting of seas. Mine came in the form of a 70-year-old man holding a dented thermos and a USB drive wrapped in tissue paper. It was Thursday morning. The courthouse fallout still echoed across the local news cycle, and my phone hadn't stopped vibrating since the video went public. Reporters wanted statements. Strangers sent flowers. Even my old auditing firm emailed to say they were proud. I turned all of it off. I didn't need noise. I needed proof. That's when Harold knocked. He stood on my porch, cheeks pink from the cold baseball cap in hand. "You busy, Helena?" he asked, holding out the small drive. I think this little thing of yours caught something interesting." I blinked. "Harold, you didn't open it, did you?" He grinned, revealing the coffee-stained teeth of someone who never apologizes for living. "Of course I did. Curiosity's the only exercise I get these days." He followed me inside, moving with the unhurried pace of a man who had already seen the worst and survived it. I brewed coffee while he told the story in his usual scenic route. "So 2 nights ago, I was trying to fix my porch light again, you know, the one that flickers like a disco whenever it rains. Anyway, I had my tablet with me and thought, why not check the bird cam? And guess what I see? The mail carrier, same guy every morning dropping an envelope into your mailbox. Then later, some fellow in a gray sedan picks it up same time every week. Yesterday, he didn't come to your house. He drove straight to Nathan's office. He leaned back, satisfied, sipping his coffee like he'd just solved a crossword puzzle. I stared at him. You're telling me you have video of that?" He nodded. "I copied the footage here. Don't worry, I didn't delete anything." My wife, God rest her soul, always said I hoard too much. Turns out sometimes clutter saves lives. I almost laughed. "Harold, you might have just saved my case." He shrugged. "Oh, I wasn't trying to be heroic. I just hate people who think they're smarter than the neighborhood." Marisol arrived an hour later. She walked in trench coat, still damp laptop already open before she sat down. "What have you got?" she asked. I handed her the drive. Harold's dove caught our thief in daylight. She inserted the USB fingers, moving fast. The screen flickered, and there it was, time-stamped footage from the camera Harold had installed weeks ago. A postal worker placed a thick envelope in my mailbox at 10:42 a.m. 2 hours later, a gray sedan pulled up. The man stepping out wore a baseball cap and leather gloves. His face wasn't clear, but the next frame was. Nathan's office building exterior camera feed from a different angle, the same man handing the envelope to the receptionist. Date and time, the same day the falsified notarization had been stamped. Marisol whistled low. That's a direct delivery trail, and this, she clicked to zoom in on the postmark number, is a USPS tracking code. If Victor subpoenas that, we can confirm exactly where it was sent and who signed for it. Harold, now on his 3rd cup of coffee, looked immensely pleased. See, government works if you give it enough caffeine. Marisol cracked a rare smile. "Mr. Quinn, you've just done better field work than half the private investigators I know." He puffed up slightly. "Well, if you ever need a hand planting evidence legally, you know where to find me." I laughed this time, a short surprise sound. The kind of laugh you forget you can make when life's been courtroom and betrayal for too long. Marisol organized the files into a digital binder. This ties the forged paperwork directly to Nathan's office. The notary claimed the fake authorization, even the fund, all of it lines up. She glanced at me. "You ready to finish this?" Victor arrived soon after, carrying a thin leather briefcase that looked older than my mortgage. He listened to the summary, nodded once, then placed the drive inside an envelope stamped Exhibit E. E for Endgame, Harold quipped. Victor actually smirked, a rare sight. More like evidence, Mr. Quinn. But I'll take your version. He opened his case, revealing a stack of organized documents. Each one was labeled cross-reference, tabbed with military precision. On top was a blue folder marked Paper Speaks. He handed it to me. You remember our first conversation? Helena, you said you didn't want revenge, only justice. Well, this is justice with footnotes. I flipped the folder open. Inside were every transcript screenshot and certified copy, the fake authorization, the expired notary license, the transfer logs, and now Harold's video evidence. Each page was signed, dated, and notarized by an actual legal officer. For the first time in weeks, the weight in my chest shifted, not gone, but lighter. Victor placed a small sticky note on top. Truth isn't loud. It's properly formatted. Marisol laughed softly. That's going on a coffee mug someday. I smiled. Make one for Harold, too. He's the reason Truth has HD footage now. Harold raised his thermos. To technology and nosy neighbors. The three of us laughed the kind of laugh that seals an unspoken alliance. Victor gathered the materials, closed the briefcase, and looked at me. We'll file the civil countersuit tomorrow. After that, it's criminal referral. Once this goes public, Nathan's reputation will collapse faster than his offshore accounts. Will Clara have to testify? I asked quietly. He hesitated. Likely yes, but it might be her chance to reclaim herself. I nodded. There was no hatred left in me, just the cold arithmetic of cause and consequence. After they left, I sat by the window. Outside, Harold was already back to pruning his roses. The Dove camera perched quietly above the porch, still innocent recording. I whispered to it like an old confidant. Sometimes proof doesn't need to shout. It just needs to exist. I opened my notebook and wrote one line at the bottom of the page. They built their case on lies. I built mine on paper. The next day, Victor would stand before the court holding that blue folder. He would not raise his voice. He would not dramatize. He would simply let the paperwork speak. And when it did, the echo would travel farther than any headline. The courthouse smelled of varnished wood and cold coffee. Reporters lined the back rows, murmuring like restless birds. My hands rested still on my lap, though my pulse beat against the skin like a quiet drum. This was the day. Nathan stood at the front of the courtroom, his silver tie shining beneath the lights. He adjusted it twice before smiling toward the judge, the smile of a man rehearsed for cameras. "Your Honor," he began, voice smooth, every syllable dripping with false sincerity. "I've only ever wanted to protect my mother-in-law. Helena has been confused, forgetful, vulnerable since my father-in-law passed. I never sought her money. I sought her safety." He placed a hand on his chest, practiced humility in every gesture. Behind him, Clara's shoulders trembled. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Nathan continued speaking as if he were auditioning for sainthood. She refused medical evaluations, withdrew funds without logic, even tried to sell her home in a state of distress. I filed for conservatorship only because I feared she might lose everything. This was never about control, it was about care. He sat down slowly with the air of a man convinced of his own benevolence. Victor rose. There was no rush, no theatrics, just the soft slide of his chair, the rustle of a blue folder marked "Paper Speaks." He carried it to the podium like a surgeon carrying a scalpel. "Your Honor," he began, voice low but cutting the petitioner claims protection. "Let us see what his protection looks like." He clicked a remote. The projector came alive, first a screenshot of Nathan's email inbox. Rows of subject lines: authorization draft, transfer confirmation, wire approval. Victor's voice was measured. These emails were obtained through subpoena. The petitioner used his office account to correspond with a bank officer about accounts in Helena Marlowe's name without her consent. Nathan shifted. The courtroom's quiet thickened. Victor clicked again. Here, an email sent on March 3rd titled, "Use her old signature file." Attached is a PDF, a scan of Mrs. Marlowe's signature extracted from her 2018 tax filings. The metadata shows edits by the petitioner's login credentials. The judge leaned forward. "Are you suggesting forgery Counselor Victor didn't look up?" "I'm not suggesting, Your Honor. I'm proving." He motioned to Marisol, who stood calm and poised. She approached the stand carrying a laptop and a printed exhibit. "I'm Marisol Vega, forensic financial investigator," she began, her tone clinical. We analyzed Mrs. Marlowe's bank activity. We found a shell entity titled Marlowe Transition Fund, created by Nathan Hale 6 months ago. All major transfers from Mrs. Marlowe's accounts funneled there, then dispersed into investment channels controlled by him. She switched the slide. A web of lines and numbers filled the screen, crisp, color-coded damning. Here she pointed, each withdrawal correlates with a personal expense, a new car lease, a resort payment, a property tax on his secondary residence in Monterey. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Victor added quietly, "The defendant didn't protect her assets. He harvested them." Nathan's lawyer objected, claiming speculation. The judge overruled him. Then Victor nodded toward me. "Your Honor, Mrs. Marlowe wishes to address the court." I stood. The world seemed to hush, every breath suspended. My knees didn't tremble. Years of courtroom floors had trained me to stand on truth alone. I looked at Nathan, calm, almost pitying. Then I turned to the judge. "I've spent 40 years as a tax auditor," I said, voice even, but resonant. Half that time I audited men like him, men who smile while they forge numbers, men who call deceit strategy. The room was still. I let the silence stretch until every ear leaned closer. "I don't need sympathy," I continued. "I'm not senile. I'm not confused. I can read a balance sheet better than most people read a grocery list. And today, I don't ask this court for vengeance. I ask that you let the documents speak. Because lies may charm the crowd, but paper never lies." Victor handed the judge the folder. Inside certified recordings, timestamps, notarized evidence, the full trail. The judge read in silence. Nathan's knuckles whitened. When the audio file played his voice saying, "Once she signs, it's all ours," the final mask shattered. Clara buried her face in her hands. Nathan froze, eyes darting toward the reporters like a trapped animal searching for an exit. The judge's gavel struck once. The sound was like thunder in a library. "This court," she said, "finds no basis for conservatorship. Furthermore, the evidence presented indicates probable fraud identity, misuse, and coercion. The petition is denied. The matter is referred to the district attorney for criminal investigation." Nathan tried to speak, but his voice broke against the rising hum of whispers. Clara stood, tears streaking her face. "Mom," she whispered. I turned toward her. Not angry, just tired, profoundly so. "Some truths, Clara," I said quietly, "have to be learned the hard way." Reporters swarmed as Victor gathered the files. Marisol closed her laptop with a precise click, the sound of completion. Nathan was escorted out by bailiffs, the cameras flashing like judgment itself. The man who once bragged about managing my future was now a headline in his own downfall. As we stepped into the corridor, Victor exhaled. "It's over," he said softly. I shook my head. "No. Justice doesn't end in a courtroom. It begins there." He smiled faintly, and we walked through the marble doors into daylight. Outside, the city hummed, as if nothing monumental had just occurred. But to me, the air felt lighter. For the first time in months, I could breathe not victory, but vindication. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of chamomile tea, the courthouse lights fading in the distance. I whispered almost to myself, "I've audited liars for half my life. Today, I just wanted them to listen to the truth," and they finally did. The weeks after the verdict unfolded like a long exhale. The phone stopped ringing. The reporters moved on. The silence, once heavy as grief, began to feel like air again. Nathan Hale was indicted on 3 felony counts: financial fraud, identity falsification, and attempted elder exploitation. His mugshot appeared briefly on the evening news, a face once confident now drawn pale and cornered by his own arrogance. He pleaded not guilty at first, but the evidence spoke louder than his charm ever could. Within a month, he accepted a plea deal. Clara filed for divorce 2 days later. I didn't attend the hearing. She sent a letter instead, handwritten shaky with tear marks that had blurred the ink near the bottom. "Mom, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I thought I was protecting him, but I see now I was protecting my comfort. I lost your trust, and maybe that's the hardest sentence of all." I folded the letter carefully as if the paper itself were fragile. Then I placed it inside the same folder where I had once kept Victor's legal documents, the one marked Paper Speaks, because even apologies, when written with sincerity, deserve to be preserved. Victor called a week later. They offered restitution, he said, roughly $260,000. We can negotiate the release next month. I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. Decline it. He paused. Are you sure it's your right? I don't want the money, I said quietly. I want my silence back. There was a long pause on the other end, then a soft, understanding sigh. You've earned it. Marisol visited next. She brought fresh tulips and a flash drive, a digital archive of the entire case, every exhibit and transcript labeled. So nothing gets lost, she said. We sat in the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the table. I offered her coffee, but she smiled. No thanks. I think I've lived on caffeine since March. I laughed, and for the first time in a while the sound felt natural. You did well, Helena, she said softly. Not just in court. You fought the right way. I looked out the window at Harold trimming the same roses he'd pruned before all this began. Justice doesn't have to be loud, I said. Sometimes it's a single signature in the right place. Marisol nodded. Still, it matters that people saw it happen, that others will know you can fight this kind of theft without becoming what they are. Before leaving, she placed her hand on mine. If you ever want to help others like you, victims of family fraud, I could connect you with a network in Sacramento. They need voices like yours. I smiled faintly. Maybe. But for now, I just want quiet. Later that evening, I walked down to the small lake behind my house. The air carried the faint scent of wet earth and pine. Ducks cut slow ripples across the water, their movements gentle and deliberate. For months, I had lived in a storm. Emails, hearings, signatures, whispers, betrayal. Now, finally, the noise had ended. I thought about Clara, about the little girl who used to run down that very path with scraped knees and a grin missing 2 front teeth. Somewhere along the way, ambition and comfort had replaced wonder. I couldn't blame her entirely. The world rewards blindness when it's convenient. Still, forgiveness wasn't a gift I could hand out like a check. It was something that had to earn its way back into the room. I sat on the wooden bench and took a slow breath. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't anything, just still. I whispered to the water, I don't need her apology. I just hope she finds what truth costs and pays it with honesty. That night, Victor sent one final email, a scanned copy of the judge's formal order, case closed. At the bottom, handwritten by Victor himself, were 3 words, "Let peace bill." He meant begin, of course. It was a typo, but I didn't correct him. Bill felt right, like something to be earned, like peace was a debt I had finally started paying back. I made tea chamomile as always and looked around my quiet home. The paperwork was gone, the headlines had faded, and the only sound left was the steady tick of the clock, the same rhythm that had carried me through decades of audits, deadlines, and long nights alone. Now it marked something simpler, not loss, not victory, just continuity. I wrote one last line in my journal before bed. I didn't win by shouting louder. I won by staying still long enough for the truth to catch up. Then I turned off the light. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, gentle, steady, without urgency. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night. Spring arrived late that year. The roses bloomed slower than usual, their petals heavy from the lingering chill of winter. I didn't mind the delay. Some things I'd learned only return when the world is ready to be gentle again. That morning, I was trimming the garden when I heard footsteps behind me, cautious, hesitant. I turned, pruning shears still in hand. It was Clara. She stood at the edge of the garden path, sunlight glinting off her tear-streaked face. Her hands trembled as she held a small paper bag, the kind used for flowers or apologies. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. It was the first time she'd called me that in nearly a year. I didn't speak. I simply set the shears down on the bench and waited. The silence between us was no longer sharp. It was fragile like glass, but it held. She approached slowly, eyes on the ground. "I heard you rebuilt the garden." I Didn't think you'd let me see it. I wiped my hands on a towel. Gardens aren't built for hiding, Clara. They're for growing again. She nodded, tears welling up again. Then, almost inaudibly, he's in custody. They said he might serve up to 5 years. I didn't flinch. Justice has its own schedule. Clara swallowed hard. I filed for divorce. I should have done it sooner. I kept believing he was just stressed, not cruel. Her voice cracked. I'm sorry, Mom, for doubting you, for letting him speak for both of us. I looked at her. My daughter, the same one who used to chase butterflies in this very yard. Life had carved deeper lines around her eyes, but the child I raised still lingered somewhere behind them. I know, I said gently, and knowing is the first step toward doing better. We sat on the garden bench for a long while. The air smelled of soil and early lavender. Clara told me she had moved into a small apartment nearby with her son, my grandson, Ethan Jr., now 7. He loved chess and drawing spaceships, she said. I smiled. I'd taught her chess at the same age. I don't have much left, she said softly, but I'm trying to make it right. I nodded and stood up. From my jacket pocket, I pulled a white envelope sealed and simple. I handed it to her. For him, I said. She frowned. What is it? Open it. Inside was a printed letterhead, the Richard Foundation Scholarship Fund. It bore Ethan Jr.'s name. It's a trust, I explained. $15,000 a year for his education. It's handled by Victor's firm. You'll have access when he turns 18. Clara blinked in disbelief. Mom, after everything? Why would you do this? I smiled faintly. Because he's innocent. And because you need to see that not everything ends with what someone took from you. Some things begin when you give even after loss. She started crying again, the kind of sob that shakes years out of a person. I reached for her hand, not tightly, not forgiving everything, but enough to bridge the distance between us. Clara, I said softly, forgiveness isn't for the other person. It's for yourself so you can sleep at night without ghosts standing over your bed. She nodded, her breath catching. I don't know if I deserve it. It's not about deserving, I replied. It's about choosing peace over pain every single day. We walked through the garden together. She stopped by the rose bushes, the ones Harold helped me replant after the trial. They're beautiful, she said. They came back from dead roots, I answered. You'd be surprised what can bloom again once it stops fearing the frost. Before leaving, she turned to me. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? I took a deep breath. I already started. Her eyes widened. I continued. The day I stopped hating you was the day I started forgiving myself for staying silent too long, for letting you learn pain the hard way. That's how forgiveness works. It doesn't erase what happened. It makes space for what still can. She pressed her hands to her heart, nodded, and walked back toward the gate. The sun broke through the clouds, then a single golden shaft cutting across the garden landing, right where we had been sitting. I looked up, whispering to no one in particular. Heaven has its own accounting system. Debts and grace both find their balance eventually. I sat back down, hands resting on my knees, the scent of earth and lilies rising with the wind. The envelope was gone, but in its place, peace had returned. Quiet, firm, deserved. And that night, for the first time in years, I didn't dream of betrayal or numbers. I dreamed of a child laughing among roses, holding a white envelope that would one day build his future. The sun was sinking over Portland slow and deliberate, as if it too had learned the art of patience. The sky was a watercolor of amber and lilac, the air carrying the faint scent of lavender from the garden below. I sat on my porch, wrapped in an old wool shawl, the kind Richard used to tease me for keeping even in summer. In my hand was a cup of chamomile tea, warm, simple, honest. The kind of comfort you don't realize you've missed until it's back. The phone on the small table beside me buzzed once. A text from Victor. Case officially closed. Proud of you. I smiled, the kind that begins somewhere deep in the chest and rises slowly to the surface. The world outside had quieted no headlines, no hearings, no echoes of betrayal, just the rustle of wind through the lavender and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking softly beneath me, and looked at the garden that had survived every season, frost storm and all. The roses were fuller now. The soil had healed. So had I. It had been almost a year since that night, the dinner that never happened, the phone call that changed everything. I thought of how fear used to sound, the sharp ring of a phone, the creak of a courtroom door, and how peace sounded now, the hum of crickets, the whisper of pages turning. I took out my journal, the same one where I'd recorded every step of the battle, every note, every date, every small truth that had kept me anchored when the world tried to rewrite my story. On the final page beneath the last line, I won by staying still long enough for the truth to catch up. I wrote another, "They tried to steal my home, but in losing it, I found where I truly live." I paused pen hovering above the page before adding one final thought. They thought they could take what I owned. Instead, they returned what I had forgotten, my peace. I closed the journal, placed it beside the tea, and watched as the first evening star flickered above the horizon. The porch light clicked on, automatically casting a soft glow over the lavender bushes. I could still see faint footprints from Clara and Ethan Jr. when they had visited a week ago. He had drawn a crude heart on the porch rail with chalk, his small hand gripping the edge, as he said, "Grandma, you have the prettiest garden in the world." Maybe that was the truest verdict of all. The phone buzzed again, a short message from Marisol this time. "We're hosting a talk next month, Elder Justice Initiative. Would you like to speak?" I smiled. My fingers hovered above the keyboard before I typed back, "Maybe next time. For now, I'm speaking to the quiet." I set the phone down and took another sip of tea. The warmth spread through me like sunlight after rain. The last of the light slipped behind the hills, and the world dimmed into shades of gold and violet. I thought about Richard, his laughter, his patience, his insistence that truth always found its way home even when people didn't. Maybe he was right. Maybe truth, like lavender, blooms stronger after it's been cut back. The night deepened. I stayed on the porch, letting the silence settle like a soft blanket. A single firefly drifted near the steps, pulsing faintly. I watched it for a while, one quiet spark against the fading day, and as the stars began to claim the sky, I whispered to the air to the memory of every lesson hard-earned. They wanted my assets, but what they took gave me something far greater, the quiet certainty of who I am. I finished my tea, placed the cup on the railing, and let the cool breeze move through the strands of my hair. In that stillness, there was no anger, no grief, no sound of reckoning. Only peace, complete, unshaken, deserved. When the world tried to take everything I owned, I thought justice would come from fighting louder. But in the end, it came from something far quieter. Patience, truth, and the peace of knowing who I am. If this story touched your heart, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Your voice matters here. Don't forget to subscribe, and share this video so more people can find strength in silence and dignity in truth.